I always know I am at the right spot on Sunday morning when we can weave in all my favorite things. All right. If you didn't get it, sorry. All right, so I have 4 kids, 20, 17, 9, and almost 6. And my 20-year-old daughter, Olivia, was home for the holidays. And she was sort of meandering around the first floor. And I thought it was a perfect time to invite a conversation about sacred sexuality. I tried to be real slick about it. I sort of thought I'd just enter in real gently. So, any special people? She was like, oh, Lord. And I noticed her sort of moving further and further away from me, and my panic begins to elevate. So I just blurt out, and just so you know, STDs are real and you should be careful. It was like my last moment to add something. And she turned around and she's like, are you for real? She was like, you are a decade too late with this conversation. You should be having this with your 9-year-old. So look, I need support. We just completed 4 weeks of a class called Conscious Coupleship. We had 24 people in that class, 24 incredible human beings devoted to being in intentional, intimate relationship with another human being. One of our teachers says that, my friends, is the final frontier. When you have a willingness to exercise and explore your own subconscious mind in the face of oftentimes your greatest provocateur. That is some deep work. So the class started out quiet. People show up a little tentative. It's like, oh, my coupleship. What do we want to share here? And by week 2, we were still tentative. By week 3, we introduced the body, some physical movement, and the space started to loosen. By the last 45 minutes of the last class, it was rapid-fire questions on the topic of sex. I was like, wow, there's a lot to be explored here. And someone raised their hand and they said, I think the next class you have to offer is conscious doing it-ship. And maybe when we offer that, we'll not have 24 people in the class, we'll have 74 people in the class. And I thought that's so interesting. What it had me realize is that there aren't a lot of spaces where we explore sexuality. And this is so interesting. So when I love to look at the etymology of words. What is their root? Where do they come from? The word sacred, if you look at a dictionary definition of it, is connected with God, that which is holy. Very clear. Sacred, connected with God, that which is holy. We have an issue, however, when we begin to introduce sex or sexuality or sexual. There's a very basic tenet that I was taught in maybe 4th grade English class, that you don't use the word in the definition of the word, because otherwise you're not actually defining the word. So let me tell you what the dictionary says about sexuality. Sexual character, possession of the structural and functional traits of sex, recognition of or emphasis upon sexual matters, involvement in sexual activity, an organism's preparedness for engaging in sexual activity. I still don't know what sexual is. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay, so I go down that rabbit hole. Then tell me, what does sexual mean? Okay, of, relating to, or for sex. Sexual matters, sexual aids, occurring between or involving the sexes, sexual relations, having sexual organs, or reproducing by processes involving both sexes. Okay, we're still in the same situation. Now remember, sacred doesn't say anything about sacred in the definition of sacred. It just says connected with God, that which is holy. Very clear. Okay, then we go down the rabbit hole of sex. Okay, either the male or female division of a species, especially as differentiated with reference to the reproductive functions. The sum of the structural and functional differences by which the male and female are distinguished, or the phenomena or behavior dependent on these differences. It almost sounds like the one who's writing this is also confused. Now we finally start to maybe get somewhere. The instinct or attraction drawing one sex toward another, nope, that's not quite it. Or its manifestation in life and conduct. And that's where I actually got something. Its manifestation in life and conduct. Okay. So perhaps then it is no surprise that we would have such a foggy state around sexuality. Perhaps then it would not be a surprise that we are far more comfortable living from the neck up than invoking the body, because it's dangerous. That is what lives in the collective consciousness of humanity. Your sexual nature is dangerous, and it shouldn't be publicly talked about. And I noticed that so clearly in that last 45 minutes of our class. It happened that my mom and her partner were taking that class, and all of a sudden, my very revealing self, if you've ever taken a class with me, you know I'm highly revealing, started to be diminished. And I heard myself say, I would feel more comfortable having this conversation if my mom wasn't in the room. And it was sort of tongue-in-cheek, but really it's quite telling that there are certain things that we don't talk about in certain company. Isn't that curious? So the objectives of today are to explore the remnants of shame that live in us around our sexual nature, to identify those places and spaces that are hard and brittle, to breathe into those spaces and wake them up, to invoke lovemaking to oneself and on the planet. Imagine what this planet would look like if we walked in a consciousness of lovemaking everywhere we were. It would be very different. So this sort of troubled exploration of sexuality, sexual, and sex led me to perhaps finding a different word that dictionary.com could articulate. And so we came up with arousal. To stir to action or strong response, excite. To stimulate sexually, to awaken, wake up. Interesting again, no need for the use of arousal in the definition. An aroused state is a transcended or ascended state. You are the manifestation of consciousness and form. Everything that exists in the world around you is an outpicturing of a realm of beliefs, a realm of thought. It is the consciousness with which you're swimming in. Not good, not bad, just is. So you'll never hear us say here, God is loving. No, God is love, period. And even more accurate, it would be to say God is, period. It's just that the human mind has such an limitation around that concept. It's too big. And so oftentimes you'll find people saying, I don't believe in God. And usually the conversation that I have is, my guess is the God that you're thinking of is a very small idea of God. And likely not the same God that I may be speaking of. So let's break that down. Consciousness could be used synonymously with the word God. So Walter Starkey wrote a book called It's All God. And he writes there, world consciousness is the level of appearances of the physical and material. It conceives of everything through the senses and believes that reality is visible. That's where most of us get trapped. World consciousness. We are only informed by that which we can see. Ascension consciousness transcends time and space. It is aware of forms, but experiences them through a different dimension than the one of which we are ordinarily aware. So imagine yourself aroused. You know, arousal occurs in many different ways all the time. We have a great discomfort in talking about sexual energy because we seem to think that means sex, and by and large, we're scared of sex. So we would just like to avoid the word altogether. I'm talking in a general sense. So imagine that you walk in waves of arousal all the time. You see a beautiful flower, a wave of arousal occurs. You have a delicious dish, a wave of arousal occurs. That is what it means to walk in a love-making state all the time. To be open and available to life force energy, the kundalini moving through your being. One of the great ways to discern how available you are to life force energy, to arousal, is to do something that you've heard me talk about before, an energy audit. You can find a form for this at conscious.is. One of our great friends, Jim Dethmer. It is a form called the energy audit, and what it invites you into is an exploration of your day by hour. And then the invitation to notice, does my energy go up? Does my energy go down? Or does it stay the same? And you get to choose who you will be in relationship to that proportion of life and how it shows up for you. So it would be good to notice if much of your life involves your energy going down or staying the same. There is an animating presence that you're not availing yourself to. Now, it would be easy for the mind to think that it wants to be in an aroused state all the time. That's also not what I'm suggesting. Contrast is very good. So let's see. He says, ascension consciousness transcends time and space. It is aware of forms, but experiences them through a different dimension than the one of which we are ordinarily aware. If you consider a time where you've experienced orgasm, you know that you have an ascended consciousness. You're out of your locked state in your mind. You have the capacity to witness yourself oftentimes. You're aware of the form around you, but you're actually in an ascended state. Wouldn't it be extraordinary to be available to that capacity of witness consciousness in places other than just a moment? That's really what the invitation is for the planet. And part of it is we have gotten trapped in a thought pattern of scarcity and survival. And so we get locked there and we perpetuate it over and over again. And what I'm inviting us into is to move out of the reptilian brain into the high altar of consciousness that doesn't get scared of your power. Because what happens is you become a bigger version of yourself, and then you must thwart it. It's too much, too scary, too big. So there's a great book called The Art of Sexual Ecstasy. I highly recommend it. It talks about sacred sexuality in the physical realm, in the spiritual realm, and the emotional realm. And Margot Anand writes this: "Our culture has lost the understanding that sexual energy is a physical expression of spiritual power. In truth, the desire to unite sexually with another human being is a reflection of an underlying spiritual need to experience wholeness and complete intimacy, transcending the individual's sense of separateness and isolation. It is a need to return to the original source of creation. Sexual union without this sacred element, carried out only for the sake of pleasure, is commonly thought to be enough to satisfy our needs, but it rarely does, and then only fleetingly. With the sacred element added, it is possible for us to experience a connection with the life force itself, with our deepest creative impulses." So, in my desire to create a meaningful connection with my daughter around this topic, I, obviously wasn't very effective, and likely in her determination was a little too late. And so I just thought, well, at least let me get the STDs in there. But really what I want for my kids to know is that there really is a holy and sacred opportunity and invitation when you connect with another human being. And that as good as feeling good is, it really is fleeting. If it's not part of a bigger, greater, grander vision, my experience is you'll be left feeling oftentimes worse than when you started. I spent many years in pursuit of connection through sex. It never satisfied me. When we use our sexual energy as an opportunity to connect deeply with one's soul, something very different becomes available. Your well is filled up. Now, when I was first introduced to that concept, it occurred for me as very heavy. It was like, oh, dear God, now we have to make sex intentional, too. I can't with this. It was just like too much. Imagine, though, that it actually increased your life force and that it doesn't have to occur as a lot of work. It can be the water, the air that fuels you, that feeds you, that quenches your thirst. So I want this month for us to talk about this in a couple different capacities. One is that when we are in a sexual encounter with another human being, that we invoke our consciousness intentionally. Your consciousness is always at play. The question is the creative process being invoked consciously, or is the creative process being invoked unconsciously? Are you playing it, or is it playing you? That's the question. So that's one topic I hope that we explore this month, is the invitation to engage sexually with other human beings, not just for a quick hit, but for an expansion of our soul, for a healing of our sense of separateness. The other opportunity that we have this month is to relate to sexual energy as not just sex. To dance on the planet, to invoke, to notice, where do I live from the neck up? Where have I allowed my life to become dehydrated? This is something that a guy named Lao Tzu, I don't know who he was, but apparently a brilliant one. When man is born, he is tender and weak. At death, he is hard and stiff. When things and plants are alive, they are soft and supple. When they are dead, they are brittle and dry. Therefore, hardness and stiffness are the companions of death, and softness and gentleness are the companions of life. So the question is, what in your life has become brittle and dry? What is dying? The good news is that in many traditions, in the history of the human experience, resurrection exists. So just because something feels dead doesn't mean it can't be reborn. So if there is something in you that is dry and brittle, there are some very tactical practices that I want to invite you into this month to reawaken the Kundalini energy, to reawaken the life force energy. If you know that you tend to be someone that lives in your mind, invite this month your body along for the ride. Invite your body to integrate with the mind. So there are a handful of ways that I would love to encourage you to do this. You can always find my talk notes on our website by 12 noon the Monday following our Sundays. So if there's ever anything that you didn't catch, you can always go back and listen, but my notes are right there. So here are a few practices that I would encourage you to consider this month. Take an inventory of your life based on your aliveness and determine what in your life feels dead or alive. Look at your career. Look at your finances. Do your finances bring you to an aroused state? Wouldn't that be fun? Or do your finances lack life? Great. It is not an opportunity to blame and shame or beat yourself up or look to the world for all the reasons that that's the case. I'm noticing constriction in my finances. I'm noticing constriction in my career. I'm noticing my relationship is feeling dry and brittle. Good to notice. You know, the great idea of this philosophy is a discipline of awareness. You cannot shift what you cannot accept. You cannot shift what you cannot see. So first we got to see it. All right? So take an inventory of your life based on aliveness and determine what in your life feels dead or alive. I always recommend looking at career, relationships, health, spiritual life, money. The body, your physical body, the world is an outpicturing of a set of beliefs. Every single thing in the manifest realm was first a thought. What thoughts are you co-signing? What do you believe to be true? It's easy to create a narrative about artists. Well, it's a life of struggle. You know, it's not in Cuba. In Cuba, the artists are royalty. It's a value system that says these are the most revered. What's the distinction? A thought. That's it. So notice, where are you subscribing to a dead end? All right? Daily practice of belly breathing. We're going to do a little bit of that today. Most human beings breathe from the top of their chest up, which means that your physical body is in a survival state all the time. You are perpetuating a physiological experience of lack. Breathing, anybody who works with me knows I'm making sounds all the time. It is an alternative to the words that could be spoken in any given moment. Good for the body, good for the mind, good for the fellow staff people. So daily practice of belly breathing. Free movement. The thing that I believe happened between week 2 of conscious coupleship and week 3 of conscious coupleship is we introduced movement. We got out of the mind and into the body. And that can be very awkward if we don't have a regular practice for that. I think I told you this once before. Nathan and I did a Tantra retreat years ago. That was the one I walked out of. And one of the things that they did was they played something called drum sex. And it was basically house music and moving one's body. And I was like, I don't need to be here paying this when I used to do this till 3 and 4 in the morning for years. I got that. But why is it that I was so drawn to that? Why was I so attracted to moving my body? Because it circulates your life force energy. Invoke movement in your daily practice. Put something on that stirs your soul. And finally, make love to yourself. Whatever that means to you. You are a more loving being on the planet when you first make love to yourself. You know, my greatest critique of traditional religious institutions and organizations is the theological commitment to brokenness and outsourcing our good. It makes me crazy because it disempowers human beings and it locates your good outside of yourself. It is why we are living in a state of consciousness where we're always looking out here for something more. Maybe you, maybe this, maybe that. Maybe I'll get a quick hit of that life force energy. It's right where you are. Osho says it like this: the basic thing is to love yourself so totally that the love overflows you and reaches others. And it's so curious to watch the mind get nervous when we say that, because we've been conditioned to think that we need to serve others, and in serving others, we will get served. That's not true, but if that idea is built with the exclusion of you in mind, it is a house built on sand. First, you, beloved. Because if you can't get right with you, you'll never be able to get right with another. There's a class that I'm teaching that kicks off at the end of this month. It's called Calling in the One. And the tagline that I gave it when I took it 12 years ago was, in order to find the right one, you have to be the right one. In order to find the right work, you must know yourself as the right work. In order to find the right partner, you must know yourself as the right partner. In order to find the right experience of wealth, you must already be the right experience of wealth. It's right where you are. That is our exercise. That is our practice. It is a devotion. It is a discipline. And as I've said before, as we invoke the brilliant Johnny Coleman, it only works if you work it. It's not magic.